Serious, Redditors who were in school the day of and after 9/11. What was it like? How did your school react to it? I was in 5th grade in the Midwest. The first thing that seemed off was the principal went on the intercom and said that recess would be indoors instead of outdoors, and we all were pissed because it was a beautiful day and it made no sense. Other than that, things were relatively normal. I remember the teacher going in and out of the room a bit, but I didn't really think much of it. Then, towards the end of the day, the teacher called for our attention and basically told us in a very kid-friendly manner what was going on. The thing I remember distinctly was she said the other kids in school may not have been told what's going on, but because we were 5th graders, the oldest in the school, she felt we were mature enough, and I felt badass. Haha. I was also a crosser, basically helped students cross the street on the walk home, and we were instructed to tell the kids to go straight home and not to a friend's house, and the same instructions were given to us when we were finished. I was in 1st grade at the time. I remember most every classroom had the news on. They forced all of the kids into the hallway to sit and talk while the teachers tried to reach loved ones or formulate a plan on how to continue the day. My parents picked me up within 15 minutes of the first plane. I don't remember much of the actual day other than that. I'm sure my parents let me play outside with the neighbors or something. I do remember how much more tense the world felt after that day. It was odd being so young and not knowing why everyone was so strict or angry the following months or years. I didn't really understand much of it until probably my freshman or sophomore year of high school. About that time I went back and watched the old news segments and documentaries. I still don't think I can fully grasp the emotions behind the day compared to someone like my parents or someone who had loved ones affected. Sophomore year, Algebra 2. Teacher turns on the very breaking news reports of the attacks. They show the towers burning, and she said, "Look, there's all my retirement money burning up." I was an immature 15-year-old and I knew this was not something to joke about. Edit. I forgot about this part. A few periods later, my English teacher told us that her husband was in Manhattan that morning. We were in the WI. After the attacks, she was unable to reach her husband, as seemed to be a pretty common occurrence on 9/11. I know inside she must have been a wreck, but she was very stoic that afternoon. I didn't like her as a teacher, but I respected her ability to do her job while worrying about the man she loved. Sounds like your teacher didn't realize the severity of the situation at first. This is something that changed you forever, especially seeing it so young. None of us did, until the second plane hit. We all assumed it was an accident, and didn't know it was a full-sized airliner that had hit. I was in 2nd grade, probably the only thing I remember vividly about 2nd grade. I lived in Connecticut at the time, fairly close to NYC. The school went into lockdown. I remember them shutting off all the lights, then wheeling a TV into every classroom so we could watch the news. We then had an assembly at the end of the day where teachers tried to explain to a bunch of elementary school kids what had happened. I was off sick that day and watched it all unfold live. I genuinely thought they were making a film or something. The penny dropped when I saw people falling. Side note, Jon Stewart is an American treasure and should be treated as such for the work he did for the victims' families. I was in 6th grade at the time. I believe I was at lunch at the time, and when we came back to class our teacher was extremely quiet and told us we were getting out early and all of our parents had been called. Confused, we asked why, and she said just watch the news when we got home, and one girl asked what channel do we need to watch, thinking it was for a homework assignment. My teacher just said any of them. Freshman year of high school, the Dutch equivalent, at least. I had heard the news on the radio and calmly told my mum to turn on the TV. It took some convincing, but she did. The next day, we watched the whole thing at school. One classmate said his coach was in NY at the moment, and he was waiting to hear from him. Coach was fine. The weird thing is that in my memory, the whole thing plays out in my childhood home. In reality, we had moved that summer, so I was in an entirely different house and do not know why I remember it differently. Memory is actually very unreliable, especially as time goes on. Your brain probably placed you in your childhood home for the duration of the memory because it was a more familiar place at the time. I was in college. The classes were really quiet. No one was talking before classes. A few of the classes went on as scheduled. Others we just kinda sat around and talked about everything. I had a business class that night. The entire 3 hours was spent discussing how this would probably affect the economy. Thought you meant business classes on a plane and how this would affect economy class NGL. I remember being in class in grade 6 in Ontario. My teacher settled everyone down and telling us America was just bombed. I remember not really knowing how to react. My teacher told us that we didn't have to worry and that we were safe, and I believed that. It was hard to wrap my mind around the implications of it. I didn't really watch the news, but I knew that people died all the time on the news. I knew it was a big tragedy, but I couldn't really grasp how big. That night I was watching after school cartoons. Between shows, they would have these hosts that introduce the cartoons, and sometimes tell jokes or read letters that kids wrote in and stuff like that. On this day, they weren't their usual goofy selves. They were quiet and solemn. They told us that there was an attack in America, and they had a moment of silence. That's probably when it really hit me that this wasn't some normal news story that happens from time to time. It was a big deal. I was in the 5th grade and had seen the second plane hit at my friend's house before we walked to school. I live in Iowa, but my uncle worked in the Pentagon. My grandma called my school to tell me that he was alive and made it out, but they never gave me the message. He made it out of the building after the plane hit but ran back in multiple times to rescue people still trapped. He ended up being one of 10 people to receive both the Purple Heart and the Soldier's Medal for his actions on that day. If you're interested in his story, you can read his first-hand account on page 33 of this document. https://www.hsdl.org/?view4774223. His name is John Grote. Whoa, that's crazy. He went back multiple times, breathing smoke from a fire to help tear a jammed door off its hinges. No wonder they gave your uncle a medal. Edit. Got the relatives mixed up. Would you like to share your story with American September? https://www.americanseptember.com/ in New Brunswick, Canada. Grade 9. The intercom told everyone in the school to head to the auditorium as there was an attack on the US. We watched on the projector and it was pretty crazy to see. Lots of kids having family in the New York area were being sent out to make calls to their parents for updates. This was in a day where cell phones were not common, and just a bad time. Of course, while we were Canadian high school students, I don't think the impact was as big as if we were Americans, but it's still an ally and geographically very close to where we were. We did attend classes in the afternoon. I was in middle school and in my first period still. That teacher went outside the room and started telling the other teachers. When the bell rang, we went to homeroom and my homeroom teacher wasn't there. After about 15 minutes a different teacher came in and started to explain what happened. They turned on the TVs in the rooms and we were allowed to watch the coverage. They made an announcement that we would be staying in homeroom all day. My homeroom teacher didn't come back for a couple hours and during that some kids started going home. My teacher finally came back and he looked like he'd been really upset. He composed himself and sat at the front of the room and explained, "My sister works in one of the buildings. I've been calling everyone trying to find something out but couldn't reach anyone. I finally just heard she just started maternity leave and wasn't there," and he cried. You could see how drained the teachers were, but they spoke to us like adults. They explained the best they could, and they let us see the coverage. It all changed so quickly. It was nerve-wracking. My mom was working in one of the towers and I had literally no idea of her whereabouts the entire morning. We were reunited when she came to pick me up. Students who had family were allowed to convene in our auditorium and there were many of us crying, scared, and some even prayed together. Eventually some other people used the opportunity to cut classes. I still remember one student claiming this was the beginning of World War III, IV, and V. I can't remember when we were allowed back to school. I still remember being reunited with my mom and also seeing the skyline without the World Trade Center for the first time, and that there was still a haze from all the ash and debris. Some other students said they saw the buildings collapse from their classrooms. I think I would have been absolutely hysterical if I had seen it.